We live in a world where our destiny is not entirely our own. While we always have the power to make decisions, our ability to act freely is mitigated by a number of forces outside of our control. In order to succeed, we must manifest our will in spite of these forces, be they financial, political, cultural, or something else entirely. To do so, we must find and use all the tools we can to promote freedom for ourselves and others. Tools that untether us from the power others have over us, grant us sovereignty, and promote principles of unrestricted speech, action, and trade. The following is an explanation of humanity's need for such tools, and the proposal of perhaps the most powerful tool we've yet to discover to promote true freedom. I'm Yevgeny Nurish, and this is the necessity of neutral money. Have you ever met a person completely free of bias? A person who holds no ill will or opinions towards any individual, group, or way of thinking. Someone who possesses no political beliefs, is beholden to no ideology, and seeks to carry out no agenda, who never has and never will. Obviously not. From a biological perspective, humans have evolved to become expert pattern recognition machines, and thus are inherently biased, and tend to become more biased over time due to our environment and our experiences. As we age, we develop heuristics, methods by which we navigate the world based on our understanding and beliefs, and we live our lives in such a way as to minimize and exclude the parts of the world we wish not to engage with. While this is useful for survival, it's not so good for cohesion. It means that no matter how hard we try, we will give preferential treatment to those we consider part of our in-group, our families, our friends, and our immediate communities. We see this bias carry into everything that's made by humans, be it our organizations, our economies, our art, or our culture. Our money is no exception. Every day, billions of people are excluded from conducting transactions and participating in markets, both local and global. They are excluded for many reasons, most of them beyond the control of the impacted individuals. For instance, all over the world, regardless of jurisdiction, the barriers of knowledge and the capital requirements for participating in the more complex systems of global trade exclude the average person. Markets like foreign exchange, commodities markets, and even the sale and purchase of stocks and bonds all rely on complicated, messy, primitive, and over-centralized systems that incur risk and are highly prone to sophisticated and opaque manipulation by the financial in-group, that is, governments, issuers, and veteran participants in those markets. Maybe this isn't a compelling enough argument that money is biased or exclusionary. After all, technically anyone can learn how to participate in these systems, even if the time and the resource commitment is prohibitively high. To be a bit more convincing, here are some other examples of the inconveniences and outright dangers of biased money. Some exclusions simply have to do with borders and sovereignty. You can't spend euros in the US because the euro is not legal tender in the United States. Some biased practices have to do with political or ideological censorship. Even private, non-government institutions like PayPal, GoFundMe, or even banks frequently and actively ban certain types of businesses, and can freeze their accounts and funds merely to disagreeing with their politics or beliefs. For instance, many of the Canadian truckers who participated in the protests against the Canadian government had all of their assets and money frozen until they capitulated to that government. In response, supporters of the truckers donated money through channels like Kickstarter and GoFundMe, which, in turn, led to Canadian officials shutting down those channels by threatening legal action against them. Sometimes private institutions freeze or censor individuals and businesses for no reason at all. I myself have been the victim of a PayPal business account freeze that resulted in me not being able to access tens of thousands of dollars that were operationally essential for over 30 days, despite the fact that I had violated none of their policies or any law, and I was able to prove so immediately with rigorous accounting and documentation for every transaction. In the end, I had to spend almost 20 hours dealing with endless customer service representatives on the phone, chat, and email to resolve an issue for which I was not responsible. These are what you might call first world problems. They're not killing anybody. But there are truly insidious categories of exclusionary monetary and financial practice. While all of the practices mentioned increase transactional friction and incidentally prevent the creation and preservation of wealth, the following examples are actually designed specifically to keep the victims of these practices permanently poor and dependent on their oppressors. Due to hyperinflation by the governments meant to support and represent their interests, holders of the Venezuelan bolivar and Argentinian peso are excluded from buying food and other essentials with their own currency, which loses 100% or more of its value each year. Some of these exclusions and biases aren't governmental, but cultural. In parts of India, certain ethnic groups are not allowed to enter the businesses of or transact with certain other ethnic groups, even though they use the same currency. Simply by merit of having been born with a certain color of skin, these groups are banned from engaging with large swaths of their own economy. Some exclusionary practices are the remnants of colonial repression, often in the form of egregious impediments on transactions. For instance, the Togolese people, merely by merit of having been a French colony, are forced to use the West African CFA franc. Because the CFA franc is not a fungible currency outside of the 8 countries it's used in, if residents of Togo wish to transact anywhere outside of this tiny bubble, they must first convert to euro, for which the Bank of France charges 15% of the converted amount. Then, if they wish to transact in a jurisdiction outside of the EU, they must convert that currency once more, likely to dollars, where they can lose up to an additional 5%. In other words, simply being born Togolese means that you lose 20% or more of your money to buy a U.S. commodity or participate in any economic activity outside of Togo. Perhaps the most pernicious example of biased exclusionary currency today is in China, where the government has successfully blended the Chinese Communist Party's unique brand of authoritarianism with their central bank digital currency, or CBDC, the digital yuan. The CCP can see every transaction users of the digital yuan make in real time and have full control over the bank accounts of their citizens. They regularly exercise this power in a number of ways. They issue currency with a built-in expiration to force users to spend money by a set date, thus artificially stimulating the economy. They can also outright ban certain types of transactions based on what is or is not convenient for them, or ban specific individuals or groups, such as political dissidents, from participating in the economy at all. You might think, well, that sucks for those people, but we don't have those issues in the US. These issues of biased and exclusionary currency may not be obvious or feel urgent for those listening in the United States, especially for those who don't travel often. US citizens have the unique privilege of holding the global reserve currency, and the dollar is usable almost anywhere in the world in some capacity. At least for the time being, the dollar is highly desirable globally, and despite our growing inflation problem, it's still quite strong compared to many other currencies. However, the relative current strength of the dollar is not guaranteed, and the citizens of the United States should remain extremely vigilant. While we do not necessarily feel the weight of financial repression to the degree that the people of Argentina, Togo, and China do, it doesn't mean that our institutions don't engage in repressive practices. Imagine, for instance, a world where the US has its own CBDC, like China. A world where your dollars, purely digital, can simply expire, or criticizing the US president on social media could lock you out of accessing your money. If the government pushed the narrative that something like consuming animal products is harmful to the environment, they could apply restrictions to how much meat you can purchase and consume. This might sound far-fetched, until you realize the US is already testing CBDCs today, right now, with the cooperation of major banks and payment networks like Visa. Furthermore, the world is complicated and connected in ways which are often impossible or at least very difficult to anticipate. The consequences of individual events which might seem insignificant echo and reverberate through the system, with massive and unpredictable impact. Roughly a week before this was recorded, the Bank of Japan announced that it would increase its 10-year bond yield band by 0.25%, which, in turn, caused a massive equity sell-off and changed the entire global bond market, additionally causing the U.S. stock market to plummet overnight. One debt offering by one country made an adjustment of 0.25%, and the entire global economy spasmed. A very uncomfortable reality is that fiat currencies, that is, currencies issued by decree and not backed by real assets, are, in truth, an experiment. An experiment built on an unsound foundation of debt and perpetual credit expansion, which is inextricably intertwined with the entire global economy. While we have performed the fiat experiment hundreds of times throughout human history in all parts of the world, the average lifespan of these currencies is only 27 years, and even the most successful have come and gone in roughly 100-year cycles. In fact, despite the faith we seem to have in it, the unbacked fiat version of the US dollar has only existed for 51 years. We aren't even that far into our version of the experiment. If you're new to this topic, I'm sure it's very tempting to say, there's no way it's this bad. This guy must be off his rocker. Our leaders know what they're doing, and while, sure, there are individual events and actors that might smell fishy, or short-term suffering that manifests as a result of the complexity of the system, this isn't evidence of systemic rot or systemic instability. My response would be, there's a difference between faith born of belief and faith born of desperate hope. I typically avoid discussing this topic at risk of sounding conspiratorial, which many find off-putting, but we are faced with a harsh reality, and it actively harms us to continue to deny or ignore it. Our elementary, middle, and high schools do not teach economics, financial history, financial literacy, or even the most basic principles of money management or the interaction between governments and currency. These are topics that affect, quite literally, every single human being on the planet. And yet, we allocate exactly 0% of the thousands of hours our children spend in primary education to these very basic concepts. I believe there's a very good reason for that. And the reason is likely that once you have even the faintest impression of the house of cards that is the global economy, or the injustices that our highest institutions perpetrate against us every second of every day, it's impossible not to be skeptical of those institutions without being in denial. After all, what incentive do the people who control the money spigot, who decide how much is printed, where it flows, and to what ends it is used, have to share that information with anyone but amongst themselves? Money that favors its issuers is not neutral money. With global debt spiraling out of control, and with our governments showing not even a desire for a solution, a world where the US dollar no longer enjoys its platinum currency status is not out of the question, or even improbable. Even assuming that our currency maintains its supremacy for the next few decades, the likelihood of us maintaining a position of complete global economic dominance in perpetuity is approaching zero. In the absolute best-case scenario, where the US dollar is somehow the first fiat currency in the thousands of years of recorded history to last forever, our politicians still actively debase our currency in the pursuit of increasingly incomprehensible goals. Case in point, the $1.7 trillion omnibus bill that just passed. It would be one thing if this egregious and ceaseless government spending benefited U.S. citizens, but instead, this bill includes $500 billion of funding for wars that have little or nothing to do with us, and funnel billions of dollars into the pockets of the legislators that voted for it, and their affiliates, and their special interests. These special interests range from highly partisan, trendy social justice causes to, and this is not an exaggeration, funding for the research of the effects of anabolic steroids and cocaine on hamsters. This bill is also not unique in its absurdity, and many like it are passed each year, throwing kerosene on an already massive fire. Money that flows into programs at the whims of those closest to its source is not neutral money. We're getting away from the point here. The point is that biased money is broken everywhere, and while the world is growing increasingly interconnected, the mediums of exchange we use are becoming increasingly separate and vulnerable to unpredictable market forces which we cannot control. What if there were a neutral money? A money truly free from bias. A money that functions the same, regardless of your socioeconomic status, your gender, your race, your beliefs, or your alignment with the ruling political class. A money that you can carry with you and transact with anywhere in the world. A money that can't be censored because it can't be controlled. Given the name of this channel, you may be able to guess that that money exists, and it's called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is software written to be perfectly neutral. It exists outside of and opposite exclusionary fiat money and financial systems. Bitcoin's only barrier to entry is your ability to access a computer or mobile phone, about 90% of the global population, and open your wallet. It doesn't have banking hours. It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, with zero downtime. Bitcoin does not care if you're in Europe or the Americas or Africa or Antarctica. You don't need a bank or exchange or any other intermediary to transact with it, no matter where you are. Bitcoin works irrespective of the color of your skin, your relative socioeconomic standing, the circumstances of your birth, or any other aspect of your identity. Bitcoin is deflationary. It has an immutable fixed supply, and less of it is produced each year. Bitcoin is a castle built on bedrock, whereas fiat is the facade of a mansion built over a sinkhole. And, of course, Bitcoin cannot be censored because it can't be controlled at all. It is the freest, most decentralized money that ever has and likely ever will exist. And in a world where our freedom and our agency is under constant assault, it's one of the only certainties we have. In fact, Bitcoin flourishes even in places where it is banned by the presiding government, because Bitcoin is not beholden to any nation state or physical location, and it's impossible to seize or freeze by any means. In places where Bitcoin has been outlawed, demand for it grows because people universally understand that if a government bans free currency, the ban on freedom itself is close behind. When the writing is on the wall for citizens of authoritarian regimes, Bitcoin empowers people and their families to put everything they have into a highly liquid and infinitely mobile asset that they can take anywhere in the world with the promise of a better life in a jurisdiction friendlier to free people. In places where financial repression is more subtle, like the US and Europe, Bitcoin acts as a neutral ground, a store of value that exists outside of the ever-inflating fiat balloon of perpetual credit expansion. Bitcoin is utterly devoid of human bias or control. It functions the same, day in and day out, no matter where in the world you are, and it cannot be censored, seized, inflated away, or destroyed by any person or organization or government. Nobody can stop you or me or anyone else from using Bitcoin. This is the power of neutral money. The world always has and always will need freedom and liberty, because humanity makes its greatest strides when it's free to innovate and to cooperate. Bitcoin is pure freedom, made digitally manifest. Thank you for listening.